Claire and David's home situation was very normal, until Claire gave birth to a beautiful daughter. Ever since that moment, strange things started happening. Every night they saw their daughter make strange hand signals. David refused to let his daughter sleep alone until David saw something. And when David finally realized what was going on, he got the shock of his life. David decided to install a camera in the room to confirm his suspicions. He was apprehensive to tell Claire what he had noticed. She just went through extensive labor and certainly had to rest. This was something he could handle on his own. Or could he? One morning, David was watching back the recordings when he saw something that shocked him. Their daughter was making a hand signal again, but this time it was different. David immediately ran to Claire. They had to get to the hospital immediately. This couldn't wait. When calling the doctor with what he had seen, they were told to immediately come in. The doctor knew he had seen this before somewhere, but he had to run some tests to confirm it. But how will he bring this news to Claire and David? But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. When carrying the crying newborn baby to the test department, the doctor could not help but think, how did this poor woman get herself into this situation? A lifestyle like this brings so many risks with it. How could this be worth it? When putting the baby down, it finally stops crying a bit and the doctors get a chance to inspect him a bit closer. But it isn't until the baby lifts his arms and makes another hand signal that the doctor sees it. He immediately knows what he is looking at and freezes in his tracks. His breath sticks as he mumbles to himself, this can't be true. Leaving the baby in the care of a nurse, he rushes back to tell the waiting parents. They have to know immediately. How could Claire have been so reckless? The doctor asked Claire if she had noticed anything during the pregnancy. This is when Claire started crying. She thought there was something seriously wrong with the baby, and that it was her fault. That is when she started explaining. Claire stumbled out of bed on Tuesday morning. Her head hurt and her stomach felt even worse. She could feel the pressure build in her throat as she ran to the bathroom to throw up. Claire hated the feeling, but it was familiar to her. She got like that when she was hungover. However, ironically, she had not been drinking the night before. Claire spent another 15 minutes in the bathroom until she eventually felt fine enough to head downstairs for breakfast. Claire was immediately greeted by her mother commenting on how pale she looked. Claire sighed and relayed her symptoms to her mom, who listened intently. Claire watched as her mother turned white as she listed the symptoms. What's wrong? Claire urged. She felt self-conscious now. Her mom was a registered nurse and had been in the profession for more than 2 decades. Her reaction to Claire's symptoms caused the young woman to worry. Finally, her mom spoke up. She asked Claire to get a pregnancy test done. Claire was nervous and peed on the tests like her mother instructed. The results were frightening. Claire's mom was right. She was pregnant. Claire sat opposite her parents, who stared at her in silence. They were both waiting for her to answer the question they had placed. Who was the father? The problem? Claire wasn't so sure. Claire sighed. She explained that if her math was correct, there were 2 possible fathers, but she wasn't certain she wanted to tell them about the possibility of a baby. It all seemed far too much for her to cope with. She couldn't stand to think of what their reactions would be. Claire was in a state of panic. It had been a few days since she had discovered she was pregnant. Although her parents had been trying to discuss it with her, she couldn't help but feel wary. She found herself debating getting an abortion. She knew she wasn't ready for kids or to change her lifestyle. What would she do? After a few days of avoiding them, Claire decided it was time to face her parents. She told them that she was planning to get an abortion. However, her parents were against this. They convinced her to keep the baby, as they would do everything to help her raise it. Although she had agreed to not abort the baby, settling into being pregnant was proving far more difficult than she could imagine. For one, it was the opposite of her current lifestyle. Part of being pregnant is giving up certain things which can be bad for the baby. Things like drinking and hard partying, things that Claire enjoys so much. Those habits were a bit more addictive than Claire had realized. So addictive that she found herself sneaking out late to indulge in them. Claire was still in the early stage of her pregnancy and wasn't showing yet. This made it easy for her to get into clubs without judgment. However, the moment of truth was coming. Claire continued on with her secret habits for a few more weeks. But finally, the moment of truth had arrived. It was time for her first checkup with the doctor. The checkup was going well as the doctor asked Claire a few questions to assess the health of the baby. That was when Claire found herself blurting out the truth. Claire confessed everything to her doctor. She admitted that although she was trying to stay healthy for the baby, she felt almost compelled to go out and party at night. Claire and the doctor have a long and serious talk about the risk and potential consequences for the baby, and by the end of it, it finally seems to click for Claire. The knowledge of what her actions could mean for the baby hit Claire in the heart. She understood that she would have to make some drastic changes to ensure that her baby was born happy and healthy. She was 7 weeks in and hoped she had not caused irreversible damage. Claire knew that along with this new leaf, she would have to come clean to those the pregnancy most closely affected. The prospective fathers, Todd and Cam. Claire made the decision to inform both men of the pregnancy and the situation surrounding it. Their reactions came as a shock to Claire, who had expected the opposite. Both men are incredibly supportive of Claire's decision. They let her know that they will be there for the baby if it is theirs and pledge to help her during her pregnancy. This motivates Claire to do even more for the baby as she turned a new leaf. From then on, the pregnancy went relatively smooth. Claire spent the rest of her pregnancy doing her best to stay healthy. One afternoon, Claire is laying on the couch watching a series. When she suddenly feels a stinging pain in her stomach, she moans loudly in pain. Her mother rushes in and immediately knows what's happening. Claire's water broke. Claire's mom held her as they both made their way to the car. She supported her daughter into the back seat and quickly started the drive to the hospital. On the way, Claire decided to call the prospective fathers of the baby. Both men insisted that they be a part of the moment. Does Claire agree? Claire gave her approval. Truthfully, she was in pain as each contraction passed through her in a painful wave. She found her thoughts were clouded by other concerns. Will the baby be healthy? Who will be the father? Will she be able to be a good mother? All questions that will be answered very soon. All the worries in her mind seemed to vanish as the contractions grew closer and the pain seemed to almost double in intensity. Claire gained a sudden realization. It was time to focus on the baby. She would do everything in her power to make sure the delivery was safe for the baby. Just as Claire began to focus on delivery, the door to the delivery room opened up. It was Todd, the first prospective father to arrive. He looked like he had stepped out of a construction catalog. A building contractor, he had been working on site when he got the call. The next time the door opened, it was the doctor who had arrived to prep Claire for the delivery. A few minutes later, Cam, the second prospective father, showed up. Like Todd, Cam was a tall, muscular, and handsome man, but he was dressed more casually as he had come from home. However, this time the room fell silent on his arrival. The room stayed silent for a second. No one seemed to know what to say. When the silence finally broke, it came from an unexpected person. The doctor spoke in surprise. "What are you doing here, Cam?" The sound of a familiar voice caused Cam to look up. He could not believe his eyes. The doctor and Cam stared at each other for a moment before awkwardly explaining the situation. As it turned out, the head doctor was Cam's uncle. Cam was aware his uncle worked at the hospital but had been too shocked by the news to consider the possibility that they would run into each other. While the news of Cam's relationship with the doctor was surprising to everyone in the room, the hospital staff hit a confusing block when they were screening the guests that would be permitted in the room. Claire had been so hyper-focused on getting her life ready she hadn't had the chance to explain the situation to the staff. The doctor and the nurses waited in confusion for an explanation. Finally, red in the face, Cam explained the situation concerning the baby's paternity to the doctor. The doctor nodded and listened silently. It was clear he was disappointed in Cam, but he said nothing. He had other priorities. The baby was on the way. Claire was beside herself with the pain. She was in so much pain that she could not be bothered with feeling embarrassed about the situation. She breathed in heavily as she waited for the hospital staff to give her a sign that the ordeal was close to over. Claire wasn't certain how much longer she could hold up. Luckily, the birthing only took about 30 minutes and soon the first cries of the baby could be heard. It was a beautiful baby girl and Claire could finally breathe a sigh of relief as she watched her daughter smile in her arms. However, this didn't last long as real worries began to set in. The truth was, Claire had become even more worried than she had been initially. Having a daughter was hard work and she wasn't certain she was cut out for it. Even as old doubts settled in, the doctors took the baby to run some tests to ensure the baby was entirely healthy. It would be a while before the doctor returned as some of the tests were extensive. While they waited, Claire, Todd, and Cam got to talking. After beating around the subject for a while, they finally started speculating on the child's paternity. Both men had come up with their own theories as to who the father was. Claire listened to Cam and Todd argue for a few minutes. It was clear that both of them were excited about the birth of the baby and even more so, wanted the baby to be theirs. For the second time in months, both men had surprised her. Claire wasn't expecting this reaction. Although both men had expressed that they wanted to be in the baby's life, it was now more clear that they both seemed genuinely happy about the news. However, Claire knew that wanting to be a good father and being able to be one were two different things. And truthfully, though she wouldn't say it, she had a preference. Staring at the men, it was obvious that Claire had a type. Both men were handsome and nice. They both looked like they stepped out of a magazine. But Cam was far more financially stable and older. Of the two men, it was clear which one of them would adjust to fatherhood better. It wasn't that Claire would be unhappy with Todd as the father, but they both knew a child was not ideal for him. Todd was a lot like her. He enjoyed partying, and even though he seemed eager for a child, Claire wasn't certain he would not regret the change in the future. Claire's mind had faded deep into her thoughts when the door finally swung open once more. Her mother stood up from her position on the couch. Both prospective fathers stopped arguing to pay attention. The doctor smiled. He had some good news to share with everyone. The baby was in perfect health. Claire was elated. For months she had worried that her reckless behavior when she mentally spiraled would negatively affect the baby. She had spent hours searching for side effects and cures, but now she knew her baby was safe. Claire was glad, looking up at the doctor she waited for. There was only one thing left. Everyone in the room was glad. Although only Claire knew about the drinking, they had all worried for the health of the baby. But now, all that anyone could think of was the matter of paternity. The doctor explained that it required an extensive DNA test and the results might take days. But then it happened. The baby was placed into the nearby crib to rest. The doctor had mentioned that once sensitivity lessened, the baby would stop crying. And as he had predicted, the baby eventually calmed down. Stretching her arm out to adjust to her new surroundings, the newborn revealed something that had the doctor reacting quickly. The doctor was shocked and a little embarrassed. He had not noticed this before. Lifting up the baby's arms once more, he checked the sides to confirm his suspicions. Just as he had suspected, right there on the baby's stretched out hand was an unmistakable mark, and the confirmation he needed. Right there on her arm was a large birthmark next to her armpit. While the presence of a birthmark may not be alarming and is certainly not a sign of a birth defect. In fact, almost all babies had a few birthmarks across their skin, but the doctor was sure he had seen this particular one before. It was a birthmark he had seen many years before on a similar-faced brown-haired baby. Cam had almost the exact same birthmark in the exact same spot. And with birthmarks having a chance to be hereditary, it was looking like Cam was the father. However, the doctor stayed silent. It was just a hunch and he preferred to wait for the results. Days went by and life seemed to take on a new normal for the new parents. Claire checked out of the hospital and took a break from work. While the family readied a house for the new baby, the DNA results were out, but the results were not a surprise to anyone. Cam was the father. In the coming days, both Claire and Cam had already realized the baby was his. He had equally spotted the birthmark on the baby, and the conception dates were better aligned with him. Although Todd was disheartened, he took the news in good faith and still visits his almost daughter. Both Cam and Claire were happy to receive the news. Not only had their suspicions been confirmed, but they were finding life as parents suited them far better than they would have ever imagined. A few months after the birth of the baby, Cam and Claire started dating and still care for their little girl, Daisy. Thank you for watching. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscription, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming stories.